Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere ancient, warm, and just a little dusty. You're walking barefoot down a sun-baked path, your toes curling into the baked clay of a street that was old before the pyramids were even a doodle on a scroll. Welcome to Ur, yes, just Ur, a city in ancient Mesopotamia where the sheep were numerous, the air was thick with incense and goat breath, and the most powerful item in town wasn't a sword. It was a stylus made of reed. You trudge past squat, sun-hardened homes. Some have rooftops stacked with drying fish. Children dart between stone doorways, barefoot and laughing, while their mothers stir lentils in clay pots. You pass a merchant's stall with barley piled in woven baskets and a suspiciously watchful goat tied to the shade post. You're not sure if it's guarding the grain or planning an escape. Everyone seems busy, except you. You're here to observe, to soak in the soft hum of daily life in a place where time ticks with the rhythm of sunrises and floodwaters. But tonight, you'll learn that beneath the calm dust of Mesopotamia, there beats the surprisingly steady pulse of accounting. Yes, accounting. Don't snore just yet. It all begins here. In this dry cradle of civilization, humans looked at their herds, especially goats, always goats, and realized, we need to keep track of this nonsense. Because when your neighbors borrow 3 goats and return 2.5 with a suspicious story involving a lion, trust alone doesn't cut it. You need records, you need math, you need a system. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and if you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city of Ur hums with a subtle, purposeful energy. It's the early dynastic period, around 2500 BCE, and you're standing near the ziggurat, that great terraced temple with staircases wide enough for a small parade of sheep. Priests bustle up and down in linen robes, their foreheads glistening under the sun. Somewhere nearby, a clerk crouches beside a low wooden table. His hands are coated in clay dust, and next to him sits a pile of what look like poker chips and a small bucket of wet clay. You watch as he presses a small conical object, about the size of your pinky, into the clay's soft surface. He's making marks, not for art, not for poetry, but for livestock, specifically goats. Turns out goats were Mesopotamia's most versatile asset. They provided milk, meat, hides, and an endless source of bleating background noise. They were currency, wealth, worship offerings, and they wandered. A lot, which made them incredibly hard to keep track of. Enter proto-accounting. The earliest known bookkeeping wasn't done with numbers, it was done with shapes. Tokens, to be exact. Little bits of clay molded into spheres, cones, and discs, each representing a specific good. A jar of oil, a measure of grain, a goat. If you wanted to prove someone owed you 4 goats, you handed them 4 little goat tokens. Cute, right? Until someone lost one. To prevent that, scribes started storing the tokens inside hollow clay envelopes called bulli. They'd seal them up and stamp the outside with the number and type of tokens inside. It was like the world's earliest PayPal, with a breakable receipt. Historians still argue whether this token method actually predates writing or whether writing evolved specifically to record transactions like this. But what's not debated is this. Once the goats became numbers, civilization started keeping score. As you wander deeper into the temple courtyard, you pass a pen filled with actual goats, roughly 12 of them, give or take a blur. A young boy tries to count them while they shift and bleat. 1, 2, 3, 6. He frowns and starts over. Welcome to the universal headache of livestock accounting. That headache birthed some of history's earliest forms of arithmetic. Mesopotamians didn't have a decimal system like we do. They used base 60, which is how we ended up with 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. It made for wonderfully divisible numbers but nightmarish multiplication tables. But hey, if you can count a herd while it's stampeding sideways, you can handle anything. Carrying the scent of clay and dung and something faintly sweet, maybe date syrup from a vendor nearby. You sit down under a woven canopy where an old man offers you a flat cake and a story. He tells you of the time his father miscounted goats before a temple audit. He said the 12th goat was just hiding. The man chuckles. Priests find him 2 jars of beer. Worth it, he said. Even back then, audits were serious business, but not everything is grim. As the sun lowers, painting the walls golden, you begin to understand. This world, so ancient, so strange, is also strangely familiar. People worry about the same things. Running out of food, getting paid fairly, being blamed for the missing goat that wasn't their fault. And in a world without paper, phones, or spreadsheets, they solved it all with a lump of clay, a few clever symbols, and an intense desire to not be cheated. So here you are, following the trail of goats and numbers, one step closer to uncovering how humanity learned to keep score. You're up one bleeding transaction at a time. The morning air is still cool, soft against your cheeks, and there's a strange hush over the city of Ur, as if even the goats haven't had their coffee yet. You're standing outside the house of a scribe. He's just waking up, grumbling to himself as he rolls out of a bed made of reeds and woven mats. He stretches, scratches his beard, and heads straight to his work table. Today, you're going to see the magic, or tedium, depending on your perspective, of early bookkeeping in action. The table is scattered with tablets of baked clay, each the size of a large smartphone. On them are rows of wedge-shaped impressions, cuneiform. It's not much to look at unless you happen to read dead languages in your sleep. But here's the thing. Each of those tablets tells a very real, very human story. 3 goats sent to the temple. 2 goats returned. 1 goat mysteriously missing. You lean in and watch as the scribe dips his stylus, just a sharpened reed, into a dish of water to moisten the clay. He glances at a group of tokens, counts them, then begins pressing into the wet tablet. Press, press, drag, press. It's rhythmic, almost like music. And it's more than just numbers. There are symbols for names, locations, even weather conditions. Apparently blaming bad flooding for a goat's disappearance was the Bronze Age version of "my dog ate it." This is the point in history when writing began to grow teeth. What started as tokens became pictographs, then abstract symbols, and finally full-blown scripts. The Mesopotamians invented cuneiform not to compose poetry, but to make sure nobody was fudging the goat numbers. Romantic, isn't it? There's a sort of poetic justice in that. The oldest love poem in the world, written in cuneiform. The oldest known legal document, cuneiform. The first complaint about a defective copper shipment, you guessed it, cuneiform. Scribes were the information gatekeepers of Mesopotamia. They trained for years to master the art, and they were highly respected, unless they lost your records. In that case, they were more likely to get an earful, or worse. Historians still debate whether scribes operated independently or were fully employed by the temple elites, but either way, they weren't exactly freelancers sipping date wine in a courtyard cafe. These guys were full-time number wranglers. And the temple? It was the city's administrative heart. You follow the scribe as he walks through the city, tablets in hand, heading for the great ziggurat. He passes vendors setting up their morning goods, strings of dried fish, reed baskets, little clay amulets shaped like gods with truly unfortunate facial expressions. Someone sneezes loudly, and the scribe mutters something about catching the dust demon. He reaches the temple's storehouse, where a line of shepherds and traders waits to report their dues. A man with a sun-scorched face and one sandal missing unloads a pair of goats from a rope leash. They look unimpressed by everything. 2 goats for the barley debt, he grumbles. The scribe examines them with the tired eyes of someone who has seen too many goats this week. He scribes a quick note, 2 goats in. Then he glances over a record from last week. Wait, wasn't this guy supposed to bring 3? Cue the classic Mesopotamian standoff. I brought the 3rd last time, the man insists. No record, the scribe replies without blinking. Tablet doesn't lie. And just like that, you witness the ancient power of the written word. Without it, this argument would be hearsay. With it, it's policy. This is accountability. And also, probably, why no one ever really liked accountants, even 4,500 years ago. You walk away from the tense exchange and into the storage hall. The smell hits first: goat musk, dried herbs, clay, old oil. Inside, rows of shelves hold all the things the temples collected as offerings, taxes, or just general goat collateral. Each row is tagged with a tiny clay tablet indicating what's on it and who it belongs to. One tag reads, 17 goats from Eridu, held in lien until spring rains. Ah, Mesopotamian bureaucracy. You can almost hear the ancient version of a hold music lyre playing somewhere in the background. And yet, as you pass each labeled shelf, it dawns on you. This was more than just goat math. This was the foundation of organized society. With a system for tracking wealth, governments could plan, temples could redistribute, and people could argue endlessly over what did or didn't happen to a certain black goat on the solstice. Just outside the storehouse, a teenage apprentice is practicing cuneiform on a lump of clay. His symbols are wonky, his goats look like oddly shaped birds, and his teacher keeps sighing dramatically every time he messes up a wedge. "How will the gods know what we owe them," she snaps, "if your goats look like dancing beetles?" Still, even bad accounting is better than no accounting. Every society starts somewhere. You walk back through the alleys as the sun climbs higher. The sounds of the market fill the air. Hagglers shouting, livestock snorting, the slap of sandals on stone. You pass a mural painted with faded images of feasts and animals. One goat eternally mid-jump like it's trying to escape history itself. Maybe it's trying to avoid being counted. As you return to your own imagined shelter, the scribe from earlier walks by, clay dust on his hands, stylus tucked behind his ear. He gives you a tired but knowing glance. Another day, another herd, another dozen lines carved in wet earth so civilization can pretend it knows what's going on. But you're starting to see it. The slow, steady build. The early pulse of systems and ledgers and order. A world where every hoofprint leaves a record. Still in ancient Mesopotamia, still surrounded by goats, and now with a new appreciation for the scribes and their styluses. But today is about something a little different. Not just how they tracked goats, but why. You're trudging through a dry, cracked plain just outside the city walls, sun already baking the dust beneath your feet. Ahead there's movement, a caravan arriving. Donkeys laden with bundles of reeds, barley sacks, and, you guessed it, more goats. This is trade day. Mesopotamia wasn't just the land between rivers. It was the land between people. Farmers, traders, herders, priests, they all had different stuff and needed more stuff. Stuff like fish, textiles, wood, and of course those spicy little imports from Dilmun that tasted like heaven and gave you terrible gas. But here's the problem. There was no coin, no paper money. If you wanted something, you had to trade for it. And if you were bringing 3 goats and leaving with 2 jars of oil and a bolt of wool, someone needed to keep track. Enter the proto-ledgers. Before cuneiform, before even pictures, Mesopotamians used small clay tokens, think game pieces from a prehistoric Monopoly set. Each one represented something: a cone for a unit of grain, a sphere for a jar of oil, a flat disc for an animal. It was literal, tangible accounting. You could hold your transaction in your hand. Imagine trying that at a modern bank. Here's 5 goat tokens and a sphere. I'd like to withdraw 1 tint and a ceremonial dagger, please. The genius, though, came when someone had the bright idea to seal these tokens in hollow clay balls called bulli. You'd put the tokens inside, seal it shut, and stamp the outside with a number and contents, like shrink wrapping your budget. These balls weren't just storage, they were contracts. If anyone questioned the deal, smash the ball and see what's inside. Historians still argue whether the bulli were ever meant to be opened or were just symbolic, like a really ancient notary service. You're watching one of these clay orbs being prepared right now. A trader named Mesh is counting out tokens for 6 goats and 2 baskets of onions. The onions, by the way, smell like they've been marinated in regret. He slips the tokens into a bulla, seals it, then hands it to a priest who nods solemnly and tucks it under his robe like it's a sacred scroll. But then Mesh does something clever. He presses the tokens onto the surface of the bulla before sealing it. A backup, a clay receipt. Over time, these impressions became more common, more detailed, and eventually, voila, independent symbols. No need for the physical token anymore. Just make the mark and everyone knows what you mean. And that right there is the big leap. Writing as asterisk, abstraction asterisk. Your mind stretches a little just watching it happen. These aren't drawings anymore. They're symbols. And that changes everything. You head into the market proper, where things are getting noisy. Traders bark out deals, children dart between stalls, and an old man with approximately 5 teeth is playing a harp with all the enthusiasm of a caffeinated squirrel. It's beautiful chaos. At one stall, a woman named Daganitu is bartering for flax thread. She holds up 2 fingers, then points to a lamb. The vendor raises an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. They argue, gestures fly, but in the end, it's the little clay token pressed into her palm that seals the deal. She's got a mark on it, her family symbol, the earliest form of a signature. Historians debate whether these symbols were personal identifiers or just stylized decorations, but either way, they worked, and they stuck. In fact, some of the earliest branding came from these tokens. A little sunburst meant this goat came from the sun-worshipping temple. A wavy line? That goat was probably raised near water. You're basically looking at the first food labels. Certified organic wasn't a thing yet, but not stolen was a solid alternative. You wander deeper into the bazaar, past a stall selling tiny statues of gods, most of whom look like they're just absolutely over it. One has the head of a lion and the body of a man with oddly toned calves. You don't ask. As you weave through the crowd, a young boy runs up holding a piece of wet clay, yelling, "I have proof! I have proof!" He's just made his first trade and wants to make sure everyone knows it. His older sister rolls her eyes but takes him seriously. This is his first ledger moment. You pause, watching him clutch that clay like it's a golden ticket. His fingers leave imprints as he holds it too tightly. But that's part of the magic. Every impression matters. Every symbol, every mark is history etched in mud. And here's where the absurdity settles in. Thousands of years from now, archaeologists will dig up that very tablet, well, one like it, and base entire theories on it. They'll argue about what 3 goats and 1 swirl means for decades. Some graduate student will write a dissertation about it, maybe even cry over it. History is weird like that. Back in the temple archives, clay tablets are drying in the sun, hardening into permanence. A goat's value, frozen forever. A bad onion deal, immortalized. Someone's debt, someone's promise, someone's lie. You realize something else too. This wasn't just bookkeeping. This was trust. Tokens, tablets, impressions. None of it worked unless people believed in it. And so they did. They believed in clay. The sun is setting now, washing the city in copper and gold. You return to the outskirts, watching shadows stretch across the cracked plain. A group of traders moves off toward the horizon, their goods packed tight, their ledgers safe. And somewhere behind you, A scribe dips his reed into the clay
Wake
again,
to the rhythmic
pressing
squish of
symbols
mud
mud under your sandals. The rains came last night, not enough to flood, but enough to turn the packed earth outside the ziggurat into a slippery stew of clay and goat droppings. Welcome to another radiant morning in ancient Mesopotamia. You're heading to the scribal school today because, frankly, if you want to understand how accounting really took off, you need to meet the people who were trained to do it, the scribes. These weren't just nerds with nice handwriting. These were the power users of clay-based data management, the high priests of counting things that bleat. You duck inside a shaded courtyard where a dozen boys, mostly sons of nobles or temple elites, are hunched over palm-sized clay tablets. There's grunting, huffing, and the occasional frustrated squeal as someone snaps their stylus for the third time that morning. You take a seat on a cool stone ledge and watch. The instructor, let's call him Saba, is the kind of man who looks like he's been tired since the invention of doors. He stomps between students, occasionally correcting a crooked wedge mark or scoffing at the pitiful attempt someone made to draw a grain jar symbol. Saba clears his throat. If you want to record goats, you must write goats. If you want to be taken seriously, you must write clearly. If you want to be remembered, well, write something they can still read after you die. Cheery guy, really. Now, what they're doing here is more than just doodling. They're learning how to write in cuneiform, the system of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay using a stylus. It's part art, part code, and 100% headache-inducing if your stylus slips. And it's evolving. You peek over one student's shoulder. He's working on a list of livestock counts. But instead of using little pictures, he's stringing together marks to represent numbers. Base 60, of course. Mesopotamians loved that number, possibly because it divides into so many things. Possibly because someone lost a bet. Base 10? Boring. Base 60. Now that's math you can respect. That's the math that gave us 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. Yeah, blame Mesopotamia the next time you flunk geometry. You're starting to see the genius in their system. One stylus, one tablet, but infinite combinations. You can count sheep, measure beer, calculate temple donations, and file complaints about your neighbor's particularly aggressive ducks, all in cuneiform. And then there's the bureaucratic twist. Each tablet has structure. Not just random lists, but organized formats. Headers, item lines, tallies. These were not doodles, they were documents. You sidle up to a drying shelf stacked with these tablets. One has a list of barley disbursements, all itemized by household. Another is a receipt for temple offerings, mostly fish and bread. And one particularly odd tablet lists one goat, one bird, one priest, angry. Historians still argue whether that was a donation, a curse, or just a really weird lunch. But here's a juicy tidbit you probably didn't expect. Not all tablets were practical. Some students, after practicing their official ledgers, would flip the tablet over and carve jokes or gossip on the back. Picture ancient tweets, but in clay and with much worse spelling. One found tablet reads something like, Nanshi smells like fish. Not exactly Pulitzer material, but deeply relatable. Still, for every snarky aside, there were 100 serious records. That's what scribes did. They froze time in mud. The rise and fall of goat populations. How many jars of beer the temple owed, who paid taxes and who forgot. And taxes. Oh, let's talk about taxes. The temple wasn't just a spiritual hub, it was the nerve center of the city's economy. Priests ran farms, coordinated irrigation, and kept meticulous records of everything from crop yields to debt repayments. If you owned land or goats or a particularly loud flute, you owed something. Scribes were the ones who wrote those obligations down, and they weren't shy about it. If you missed a tax, the record was there. If you paid late, the record was there. If you tried to bribe the scribe with leftover cheese, guess what? Still there. possibly with a snide note about your hygiene. That's the thing. You're starting to realize Mesopotamian accounting wasn't dry. It was human, petty, brilliant, meticulous, and messy. Kind of like middle school, but with more goats and less acne. You step outside, blinking in the sun, as a group of novice scribes files past you, laughing, slapping each other with reeds, and trying not to drop their tablets. One poor kid stumbles, and splat, 3 hours of counting oxen, now a clay pancake. He groans. His friend shrugs and says, "Well, at least you didn't break a stylus this time." You wander off down a quieter path, where more seasoned scribes are gathered under an awning. They're compiling monthly ledgers, scrolling through tablets like accountants scrolling Excel. These tablets will be filed in temple archives, vaults of clay stretching back generations. Some scholars call these archives the first libraries. Others call them the first bureaucratic nightmares. You peek at one particularly dense tablet. The marks are neat, confident, fast. It lists 3 ewes for the festival, 4 jars of beer, 1 cart borrowed by Akala, cart not returned. You feel for Akala. Someone's going to ask about that cart in a few millennia. And here's the punchline. These people, these scribes, were among the most respected members of society. Not because they could draw well, but because they could prove things. When a trade went wrong, or someone lied, or a priest got stingy, the tablet was the final word. Even kings listened to scribes, because kings came and went. Clay tablets? They stuck around. The sun lowers, the day winds down. You're perched on a warm stone bench, watching as scribes carry their tablets into storage chambers, rows and rows of clay, waiting to be read, copied, disputed, or ignored for centuries. And just before you drift away again, you hear Saba mutter to a student, "If you're going to write history, at least spell goat correctly this time." The clay-baked scent of twilight and roasted onions wakes you again. And by the time you're back on your feet, the temples are quieting down and the goat pens are stirring up. That's the thing. You never truly escape the goats here. You smell them before you hear them, and you hear them long before you want to. But today, your dusty path winds towards something more impressive than livestock, the temple warehouse district. You wander through looming adobe corridors, shaded and cool, until you reach the heart of it, a vast series of chambers, each one packed wall to wall with jars, sacks, and yes, tablets. Welcome to the temple granary and its sidekick, the records hall. These buildings? They're the data centers of Uruk or Lagash or wherever this humid reenactment of ancient logistics has landed you. Everything comes through here: barley, fish, textiles, beer, oil, tools, and of course animals. The Mesopotamians were hoarders, but only the useful kind. You spot an overseer with a trimmed beard and an attitude that says, "I haven't smiled since the last eclipse." He's tracking deliveries on a damp clay ledger and mumbling totals to his assistant like an abacus with a bad attitude. You inch closer. The ledger reads, 123 goats, 37 sick, 12 very loud. The entries are precise and not without personality. The Mesopotamians weren't just tallying livestock, they were qualifying them. Quantity mattered, sure, but so did quality. You wouldn't want to offer a limping goat to a god, would you? And now, here's the twist. These ledgers weren't made to last. They were wet clay tablets stored in baskets or racks, meant to be reused. Only if something truly mattered, like a royal decree, a temple loan, or a scandal involving missing oxen, would they fire the tablet in a kiln to preserve it. But until then, everything lived in clay. And the temple warehouse had everything. It wasn't just a storehouse. It was an economic engine. Picture a medieval Costco, run by priests and powered by barley. This is where it gets weird in the best way. Many goods were tracked not by individual items, but by standardized ration units. You see one scribe stamping 1 gyur over and over into clay. That's about 300 liters, a Mesopotamian supermeasurement for grain. Another tablet logs 2 sela of beer, roughly 1 liter. In case you're wondering, that's a normal ration for a temple worker, or a decent Friday night. The whole system was shockingly advanced. Inventory would come in, get weighed or counted, then logged with cuneiform marks using a stylus that probably hadn't been cleaned in a week. Then, here's the kicker, a second scribe would double-check the math. You think the IRS is picky? Try arguing with a Mesopotamian who just inked your goat debt into wet clay with zero eraser. And if you failed to pay what you owed the temple, that became its own entry. Debts were tracked obsessively. Names, amounts, due dates, sometimes even collateral. If not paid by harvest, lender will seize one, wife, or cart. Seriously, one real tablet actually includes a fine that reads 10 shekels and a slap. You can't make this stuff up. But here's the real kicker. These accounting systems weren't just for managing goods, they were the foundation for social order. The temple wasn't simply storing excess grain, it was redistributing resources. That means taxes came in from farmers, and then rations went out to workers, priests, and dependent families. It was both socialist dream and bureaucratic headache rolled into one. And this brings you to the central paradox. These people couldn't read or write casually. Only scribes could do that. So, the average farmer didn't read their goat count. They trusted the temple to record it faithfully, which, let's be honest, left plenty of room for creative accounting. Historians still argue whether temples manipulated these records to control the population or just to pad their own sacrificial budget. Some think priests exaggerated goat herds to impress rival cities. Others suggest they lowballed harvests to dodge royal taxes. Either way, the system worked. For someone. You head deeper into the storage chambers and find a section for clay tags, tiny tablets attached to goods with string. It's adorable. A jar of sesame oil might have a tag reading "Property of Inanna's kitchen, do not steal." Basically, it's the ancient world's version of a sticky note, but one that could outlast your grandchildren. And now, the curveball. Somewhere among the tablets you notice something odd, a tablet with almost no numbers. Instead, it's a narrative. A story about a shipment delayed by flooding and how one scribe lost a sandal trying to save a jar of beer. It's written in almost poetic cuneiform, satirical even. Probably a joke among the scribes, but written well enough to survive. That's when it hits you. Accounting wasn't just about logistics. It was the start of storytelling. These people weren't just tracking goats, they were tracking life. Moments, accidents, rivalries, grudges, and beer jokes. And they wrote them down. Not for us, maybe, but still. Here we are. Outside, the sky turns a deep violet. The air smells like warm grain and sandalwood. A boy runs past, clutching a fresh tablet and grinning like he just balanced the entire city's barley budget. You find a quiet corner between two cooling granary walls. The hum of temple labor fades. Somewhere, a goat sneezes, and you think, you've seen the bones of the world's first bureaucracy, clings to your tunic like yesterday's regrets. And as you stretch your legs, still sore from wandering the temple archives, you realize there's more to dig through than dusty storerooms and cranky scribes. You're headed now to a place few ever saw, the inner sanctum of the temple accountant. Not a high priest, not a king. No, this was the nerd in the corner whose stylus was sharper than a soldier's spear and whose clay tablets could make or break entire households. You duck under a lintel etched with faint inscriptions, something about purity, goats, and no sandals beyond this point. The chamber is smaller than you expect, dimly lit, and smells faintly of old barley and ink. On a low table sits an array of styluses, each carved from bone or reed, their tips worn smooth from years of tapping. Next to them are small trays of wet clay, and above all, shelves. So many shelves, and on those shelves, stacks of numerical poetry. You look closer. This wasn't just bean counting. It was symbolic. Imagine an abacus mixed with a graphic novel. These clay slabs were coated with abstract shapes, cones, wedges, circles, each one representing not just quantity, but type, purpose, destination. Here's where it gets spicy. Before cuneiform came along, early accounting was almost entirely pictographic. They called them tokens, tiny little 3D symbols, spheres for grain, pyramids for livestock, discs for oil. The accountant would gather a handful into a sealed clay envelope, like Mesopotamian bubble wrap. If you broke it open, you could verify what was inside. But before breaking it, you'd trust the seals and marks stamped into the outer surface. No tampering allowed. Think of it like the original blockchain. Unhackable, unless you were really good at clay forgery. You squint at one of these ancient clay envelopes. It's cracked open. Inside, 15 small conical tokens and one flat square. Translation? Probably 15 goats and one angry farmer. Eventually, though, the accountants hit a problem. There were just too many goats, and barley, and debtors, and angry farmers. These tokens weren't cutting it anymore. So some genius, maybe a bored scribe with a bad back, realized, why not just draw the token shapes on the tablet itself? Boom. Two-dimensional accounting was born. You just witnessed the pivot point, proto-writing. The scribes went from juggling tokens to pressing wedge-shaped impressions into wet clay, each one a stylized version of a token. It wasn't just shorthand. It was innovation. You feel the vibe shift in the room. This is history's beta version of the spreadsheet. That's when you spot a scribe at work, a young one, face smeared with clay, tunic splattered with ink. He's hunched over a tablet, stylus dancing like a caffeinated spider. You peer closer. He's doing payroll, literally. He's calculating how many seeli of beer and how many loaves of bread each laborer should get this week, based on how many days they showed up to haul bricks. 1 man, 5 days, 5 loaves, 5 beer. Unless he was late. Then, no beer. Brutal. You whisper to yourself, HR has always been like this, huh? But here's the shocker. These were not wages in the way you think of them. Workers didn't receive silver. They received rations, food, oil, textiles. The economy was run on redistribution, not currency. Some call it a command economy, others a temple economy. Either way, the temples were both employer and landlord. Historians still argue whether this system empowered the people or kept them conveniently dependent. Was it benevolence or just an efficient leash? You wander further. Now you see tablets that record the weird stuff. Temple festivals and feasts. One entry logs a celebration where 4 oxen, 10 goats, 70 loaves, and 1 magician were delivered. 1 magician? Was that a job title? Or a party favor? No one knows. There are even logs of beer strength. The scribes would rate batches based on foaminess and thickness. One tablet literally translates to, too strong for the young. Causes dreams. You chuckle. Ancient beer reviews. 5 stars would hallucinate again. And still, amid the formulas and figures, you notice patterns. There are female names, lots of them. Women worked in textile production, food preparation, even in accounting roles. A famous scribe named Enheduanna, yes, her, wasn't just a priestess, but an administrator, poet, and accountant all rolled into one. Picture Marie Kondo if she also ran the Treasury Department. You realize something quietly profound. These accountants weren't background noise. They were civilization's central nervous system. Without their clay logic, there would have been no temples, no trade, no taxes, and probably no goats left standing. One tablet toward the back catches your eye. It's faded, cracked. But you can still make out the symbols. It's an audit. Yup, an audit. Some unlucky herd manager got caught skimming barley. The accounting scribe did the math, double-checked it, then called him out. on clay. His name, the shortfall, the penalty, all there for eternity. No delete button, no plausible deniability. The accountant was judge, jury, and Excel master. And then the wind shifts. A cool breeze sneaks through the temple corridor. Somewhere, a clay tablet clinks onto the stone floor. A warning? A callback? A reminder? You think about the quiet power of paperwork. How every goat and grain you've seen on this journey wasn't just real, it was recorded, watched, counted, filed. A civilization scribbled its memory into the earth and dared time to erase it. Spoiler, time didn't win. You sit beside the scribe now, his hands methodically shaping the past. He glances up, offers a nod, then goes back to work. You lean your head against the cool wall. In a world run by kings and warriors, it was the accountants who built the system. Slowly as your eyes adjust to the shifting light outside the temple, stepping back into the dusty courtyard with a head full of wedge marks and barley math. Your sandals crunch over scattered pebbles. The sun is doing that Mesopotamian thing again, clinging to the sky like it forgot it's supposed to set. You rub your temples, overwhelmed. You thought you'd come here to understand a few goat receipts. Instead, you've seen the blueprint of civilization carved into mud. But hey, you're not done yet. There's one more place calling to you, the granary. You shuffle down a shaded alleyway where the temple walls sweat heat and the air thickens with the smell of baked earth and dry straw. And there it is, the great communal granary. It hums with the dull labor of storage, inspection, redistribution. The whole place runs like an administrative engine, and you, brave soul, are about to walk into its intake valve. You duck past the gatekeeper, who barely looks up from his tally marks. Inside, the granary feels like a warehouse crossed with a puzzle box. Stacked sacks of barley form crude aisles, and scribes pace the floor with clay slates in hand, murmuring to each other in clipped Sumerian like they're reading off a menu of grains. You edge closer to one scribe who's clearly had too much sun and not enough fermented date juice. He's arguing over a batch of lentils. Apparently, they were supposed to be weighed using a standard mina, but someone used an off-kilter scale stone. Oh no, fraud alert. He mutters, "They think I won't notice." They always think I won't notice. This guy is the original forensic accountant. What hits you hardest isn't the food or the math, it's the system. See, everything here is part of the temple's massive economic machine. It works like this. Farmers deliver a portion of their crops to the temple granary, usually as part of a tax or tithe. In return, the temple redistributes food to workers, priests, even soldiers. Want to build a ziggurat? Cool. You'll need 20 men, 50 bricks a day, and enough rations to feed a village. But don't imagine farmers just dropping off their grain like generous neighbors. No. Every delivery was logged. The name of the farmer, the amount, the date, the expected moisture level, whether the grain had bugs, all inscribed in clay, pressed with a stylus. Permanent. It's like Amazon warehouse meets the DMV, except run by priests in linen robes. You trail a young assistant as he carries a clay tablet stamped with today's records. He's heading to the back room where tablets are stored in a system so elaborate you half expect to see a barcode scanner. Instead, you find rows and rows of wooden trays stacked with tablets, sorted by date and type, each shelf labeled in cuneiform like barley, 2nd year of King Lugal-Zagizi. That's another thing. Time. These people didn't use years like 2032 or Friday, June 10th. They measured time by kings. So a receipt might say, year when Enlil blessed the Great Canal, or year King Naram-Sin smashed the mountain rebels. Very poetic, very confusing for tax season. You run a finger over one particularly thick tablet. It's from the reign of Ur-Nammu, and it documents a flood relief ration. That year, the river overflowed early, and half the barley fields turned into giant bowls of cereal. so the temple released emergency supplies, but not without conditions. Each family had to sign, well, impress, a clay slip agreeing to repay the barley later. It's the first known instance of disaster debt. Historians still argue whether these relief efforts were charitable or just a clever way to trap farmers in endless obligation. One scholar dubbed it the original student loan. And here's the kicker. You find a tiny tablet, like palm-sized, with a message scratched hurriedly in uneven wedges. A plea. It reads something like, "My grain was taken twice. I am owed." No signature, just frustration baked into the clay. It hits you hard. Thousands of years ago, someone got stiffed, and they wrote it down. They needed it remembered. You imagine them pacing their mud courtyard, angry, sunburned, holding this tablet like a protest sign. No email, no HR hotline, just clay and hope. Not all tablets were so bleak. Some were celebratory. The successful completion of a massive granary inventory would be commemorated with a ritual. Singing, feasting, probably some ceremonial goat appreciation. You find one such tablet carved with little star shapes, decorative flair to mark a big moment. Like confetti, but heavier. Even more fascinating, the grain wasn't always just grain. In some records, you see spices, dried fish, or exotic items, like lapis lazuli or frankincense. These were used for temple offerings or elite banquets. Accounting wasn't just about calories, it was about prestige. You're not just managing food, you're curating culture. Suddenly, a low rumble echoes through the chamber. You freeze. Earthquake? Stampede? Nope, just a bored ox tied outside the door. Even the animals are part of this accounting ecosystem. You sit on a sack of barley. It's lumpy but comforting. You let your eyes drift across the rhythmic movements of the scribes, the subtle choreography of the clay. No shouting, no chaos, just quiet control. It feels almost sacred. And here's your fun little tidbit. Some tablets were booby-trapped. Not with poison darts, don't get excited, but with curses. A scribe might inscribe a message on the back. May Namtar, demon of plague, afflict anyone who alters this record. A Mesopotamian version of tamper-proof. As you rest your head against the cool stone wall, you consider the brilliance of it all. These weren't just food logs. They were the threads that held the social fabric together. From farm to feast, from field to fire pit, it all passed through the hands of accountants who never lifted a sword, but shaped the kingdom nonetheless. You breathe in slowly. The smell of clay, sweat, and ambition fills your lungs. You came looking for goats. You found the foundation of organized life. And all of it, every single calculation, you stretch your back with a creaky groan, like an overworked scribe who's just realized his stylus is blunt again. The granary behind you hums on, its clay archives whispering to no one in particular. But you're not done yet. You wander out into the twilight, stomach rumbling slightly, probably empathy for the grain you just spent an hour cataloging in your head. The city doesn't sleep yet. Lamps flicker in narrow windows, and temple bells give off their last clink of the day. Your destination now lies beyond the sacred courtyards and stone walls, the edge of town where the real action simmers, the markets. This is where accounting leaves the temple robes behind and gets its hands dirty. You follow a winding lane that dips between mud brick houses and reed-roofed shacks. The smell of roasted onions, wet goat fur, and someone's very ambitious perfume reaches your nose in a chaotic blend. The market's still buzzing, vendors closing up stalls, buyers arguing over late deals, scribes in the corner finalizing payments. Here, barter still exists, but let's not romanticize it. Barter's a nightmare. You want fish? I want sandals. But I don't want your weird-smelling fish, and you don't wear my sandal size. Welcome to economic gridlock. So, Mesopotamians developed something better. Unit equivalency. Instead of trading goods directly, people used the temple's standard measures, like silver weights or shekels of barley, as common reference points. No one's walking around with coins yet, but the idea's there. Assign value, log exchange, and move on. Simple, except it wasn't. You squeeze past a group of traders inspecting a tablet. One points to a cuneiform mark and squints like he's trying to read the fine print on a cereal box. Turns out this tablet's a price record. 1 goat equals 3 shekels of silver or 20 bushels of barley, depending on market rates. And yes, market rates fluctuated. Seasonal, regional, and even mood-based shifts. Sometimes a drought meant goats skyrocketed in value. Other times, a bad omen sent prices tumbling because no one wants a cursed goat, apparently. The scribes here aren't priests, they're freelancers. Think of them as accountants with dirt under their nails and maybe a side hustle in fortune-telling. They sit under canopies, keeping ledgers for anyone who can't write. For a fee, of course. Want to prove you paid for that cartload of reeds? Better get it in clay. You pass a stall selling copper tools. The vendor, a wiry man with one eyebrow doing all the heavy lifting, proudly displays a tablet showing his inventory. It's like an ancient showroom. Not for customers, most can't read, but for authorities. Because in this system, if you get caught lying about your stock, the temple can seize your goods. Or worse, send a guy named something like Banhammer to teach you a lesson. There's a tablet here that catches your eye. A small, neat one, freshly pressed and drying in the sun. It reads like a receipt. 1 jug of sesame oil, traded to Kalbum, son of Idunsin, in exchange for 1 hide and 1 bowl of dates. May Shamash witness. A witness clause. Not just a transaction, but a promise. That's what writing did. It made things last. And now, a little side fact for the road. Some tablets weren't meant to last forever. They were dried in the sun, not baked, so they could be erased and reused, like a Mesopotamian whiteboard. But the permanent ones? They were baked hard. Court documents, property deeds, IOUs between city-states. You don't half-bake your war loan. Historians still argue whether these market scribes worked for themselves, the temple, or a sort of accountants' guild. The lines are blurry, mostly because no one wrote down their job descriptions in modern HR lingo, but they were trusted, often feared, and always busy. You hear laughter and turn to find a group of merchants drinking from reed straws in a communal beer pot. Yep, beer, liquid bread. And yes, it was recorded in clay. Workers were often paid in beer rations, tracked meticulously in daily logs. You sidle over. One of the merchants waves you in, tipsy but generous. You sip from the pot. It's gritty and warm, but the gesture, priceless. Someone at the table slaps down a tablet. It's a bet. I wager 2 silver weights, he slurs, that I can bring a sheep from Sippar in 3 days. The others hoot. The scribe starts writing. This isn't just idle fun, it's a legal document now. Ancient Mesopotamians didn't need Vegas. They had contracts, wagers, and witnesses with beer foam on their beards. But not all transactions were that casual. Further down, under a clay awning, you spot a young woman negotiating a land lease. She's calm, precise. The scribe beside her logs were each term. 5 years. 5 plots. 3 bushels per season. Payable at harvest. You notice the tablet has multiple lines for witnesses. It's not just about trust, it's about covering your behind when the river decides to flood your wheat again. There's a rumor, one whispered by bored archaeologists over coffee, that some of these scribes deliberately added hard-to-read marks to tablets. Why? Job security. If no one else can decipher it, they have to come back to you. And in one corner, shaded by an old fig tree, there's a forgotten stall with a crate of broken tablets. Damaged, cracked, useless now. Like expired receipts from a time long past. You brush your fingers across one. Half a goat. The rest of the story, lost. You sigh. You could stay here all night, listening to the rustle of barley bags and the clink of styluses. But the markets are winding down. Torches are being doused. The scribes pack up their tablets like magicians storing away tablet dust on your fingertips. A faint taste of beer still in your mouth, and the faint realization that what you've just witnessed isn't just commerce, it's memory. Every scratched line on every tablet is a whisper across time. A story of trust, risk, value, and very, very specific, and a rooster who sounds like he's mid-existential crisis. The sun peeks through your reed window in dusty orange beams, and you stretch, already picturing the smell of wet clay and goat fur. Because today, your job gets official. You're headed to the temple archives. The word temple might conjure up images of gold altars and incense, but this is Mesopotamia. Temples here are more than places of worship. They're corporate headquarters, economic command centers, and spiritual HR departments rolled into one mud brick ziggurat. You step out, pass through alleyways still wet with morning dew, and eventually reach it, a terraced mountain of baked clay and belief. The ziggurat of Ur looms above you, massive, solemn, and absolutely not OSHA compliant. You climb steps wide enough to land a cow sideways. Every few feet, you see a priest-accountant, or maybe an accountant-priest, the distinction is blurry, carrying armfuls of tablets in baskets like sacred muffins. Inside, the air cools, dense with incense and the tang of limestone dust. You pass walls etched with old lists, names, offerings, debts. If you squint, it looks less like decoration and more like a giant spreadsheet, just without the soul-sucking formulas. This is where real bookkeeping happens, not in markets, but in back rooms full of dry air and dead languages. Your guide today is a record keeper named Nidintu. He's got ink stains on his fingers, and the kind of eyebrows that suggest he hasn't slept since the last lunar eclipse. He leads you through rows of cubbyholes stacked with tablets, each marked with a seal, symbols pressed in while the clay was still soft, identifying its scribe or issuing priest. You can practically hear the crunch of millennia beneath your sandals. Nidintu points to a stack. Goat inventory, temple year 5. Lot of chewing, not a lot of wool. The tablets aren't just numbers. Some are shaped like little domes, others like leaves or even shoes. Before writing evolved into consistent rectangular tablets, form followed function. A tablet shaped like a cone might mean grain. A disc, possibly a tax receipt. And the text? Often like reading someone's very determined attempt at passive-aggressive poetry. One tablet reads, 4 goats missing. Accused, Shulgi, son of Gimil. If goats not returned by next moon, curse of Enlil upon him. That's firm. You wander into a deeper chamber where clay tokens are stored. Remember those? Little abstract pieces, cones, spheres, discs, used before tablets were a thing. Each shape represented a different commodity. Want to keep track of your sheep? Drop a few cone tokens into a sealed clay envelope, press a seal on the outside, and voila, goat data packet. Historians still argue whether these envelopes, called bullae, were opened frequently or kept sealed as a form of trust-based bookkeeping. Some think they were like safes, break only if needed. Others believe they were more like tamper-evident packaging. Eventually, those same scribes started drawing the token shapes onto the outside. Then they skipped the tokens altogether and just scratched the shapes directly into tablets. Congratulations, you've just watched the world's first accounting software update. And yes, the first thing we ever wrote down as humans wasn't poetry or epic tales. It was a receipt for goats. Not exactly Shakespeare, but far more urgent when your livelihood bleats and chews everything in sight. Nidintu leads you to the Holy Grail, a master ledger the size of a pizza box and 10 times heavier. He sets it down with the care of someone lowering a baby dragon onto its pillow. This, he whispers, is the temple's year-end summary. You lean in, every column etched with lines so straight they could have been made with a laser. if lasers existed. Dates, names, quantities, events. You see entire families listed by their tax payments. Barley, cattle, labor days contributed. It's haunting, like peeking through a divine Excel sheet, knowing each name had a face, a voice, a story. And sometimes, stories end. In one corner of the tablet, there's a single line, hastily carved, account closed. Death by river. Brutal, honest, efficient. But not everything here is grim. A side tablet records the temple's festival expenses. 2 oxen for sacrifice, 50 jugs of beer for priests, 1 barrel of sesame oil for ritual anointing and banquet massages. Yes, you read that right. Fringe detail of the day? Some temples kept separate books, one public, one private. Just like modern companies with offshore accounts. You wonder how many divine bribes went under the clay radar. One scholar even floated the idea that entire temples engaged in selective accounting. A holy Ponzi scheme? Maybe. You ask Nadintu about audits. He smirks. Oh, we audit. Temple law says even a priest who miscounts goats gets trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal, in this context, might mean standing in a river while everyone watches to see if you drown or survive. Not exactly a spreadsheet recalculation. As you flip through more tablets, gently, because you're not here to be that clumsy museum visitor, you notice something deeper than just math, the voice. Each line contains the anxiety, ambition, and rituals of daily life. A scribe wasn't just adding up numbers, he was immortalizing relationships, responsibilities, and reputations. And reputation? That mattered more than silver. One badly cracked tablet catches your attention. It details a dispute between 2 brothers over land inheritance. The entry ends with, Temple scribe summoned, term sealed, witnessed by Nana, god of the moon. Historians still debate whether invoking deities in ledgers was spiritual formality or strategic intimidation. You mess with this agreement, you're not just crossing me, you're crossing the moon god himself. Bold move. Eventually, Nadintu hands you a stylus. You write, he says. Practice. You press it into wet clay, trying to copy the neat wedge shapes. It's not pretty. Your lines look like a hedgehog sneezed in the mud, but for a moment you understand. Every scribe starts here. Awkward, careful, hoping the data outlives the disaster of daily life. Outside, the temple bells toll. You step out, the clay tablet still drying in your hand, and the air tastes like dust and pride. You didn't just visit a temple, you visited a database, one where goats, gods, and governance all coexist in cuneiform. Still holding and you didn't even need clay tablet, your first official attempt at cuneiform, and trying not to feel like a preschooler who just finger-painted the Mona Lisa. But hey, every master scribe starts somewhere. Just don't drop it, because once it hardens in the sun, that misspelled inventory of 6 sheep, or was it 16, becomes eternal. The temple bells are still echoing through the streets as you wander back into the city, dodging carts pulled by oxen and one goat that clearly has unresolved boundary issues. You pass vendors shouting over each other, trying to outsell their neighbor in everything from fish to oil to one suspiciously overripe melon. This, right here, is where accounting meets reality. In the temples, scribes record what should happen. Out here, it's chaos, it's bartering, it's people pretending 3 shriveled dates equal a silver shekel. And someone has to make sense of it. Guess who that someone is? Yep, you. You've been called to assist with a very special job, market recon. Today, you're not writing for the gods, you're writing for the guilds. Craft guilds in Mesopotamia weren't just a bunch of potters hanging out over beer and comparing kilns. They were tightly organized groups with set prices, membership rules, and, most importantly, regulated trade. Think of them as ancient unions crossed with slightly snobbish LinkedIn circles. You're walking with Moria Moon, a sharp-tongued weaver who tracks wool production for her guild. She's showing you how to calculate output, labor wages, and raw material costs, all while haggling viciously over the price of dyed thread. "Don't trust the dyers," she says, eyeing a man who looks permanently stained purple. "They water it down." You're learning quickly that accounting here isn't just about numbers. It's politics. Who owes whom, who's skimming extra flour from the shipments, and whose cousin suddenly got 10 extra goats after the last trade caravan passed through. A mainstream historical fact hits you right in the sandals. Mesopotamia had some of the first standardized systems of weights and measures. Small stone weights, carefully carved and marked, were used to keep trades fair. There were shekel weights, mina weights, and even some so tiny they could balance on your fingertip. Traders used these like we use measuring cups, except if your cup was off, you could get cursed or sued. Or both. That's right. Mesopotamia had legal frameworks for fraud. Hammurabi's code, you'll hear more about him later, laid it out in stone, literally. Steal, cheat, or falsify trade accounts, and you weren't just getting fined. You could be whipped, exiled, or tossed in the river. Business was serious business, but it wasn't always fair. You pass a woman with a cart full of clay jugs. She's shouting about taxes. Apparently, temple collectors came by earlier and took more than the tithe, leaving her barely enough to get by. Mariamun whispers that temple scribes are often told to round up the collection when supplies are low. Fringe detail for you. There's evidence that some scribes carried dual tablets, one for temple records, one for personal pockets. As in, write one thing, collect another, and hope the gods are too busy to audit. Historians still argue whether these double entries were common or just rare acts of corruption. Some say it was a systemic practice, especially during drought years. Others think it was just a few rogue scribes playing fast and loose with math. You reach the central granary, a massive warehouse lined with clay bins and guarded like it holds the crown jewels. It sort of does. Grain is currency, life, and leverage. Every measure that comes in is recorded, sealed, and watched by two scribes, one from the temple, one from the city. The two men nod at you, mid-argument about a shipment of barley that arrived underweight. One claims it's shrinkage from transit. The other suspects theft. Neither seems happy. You get roped into helping recount a bin. It's hot, dusty, and you get more chaff in your mouth than a prize chicken. But eventually, you settle the dispute with a new measure and some diplomatic eyebrow raising. It's here you realize something strange. Accounting isn't just about tracking stuff, it's about keeping peace. The scribe's job isn't only to write what happened, it's to decide whose story wins. One bad calculation, one altered record, and you could start a feud that lasts generations. Back at your quarters, you try to copy one of the grain inventory forms you saw. It includes date of delivery, quantity expected versus received, name of supplier notes on transport damage or divine mischief. Yes, that's a real category. Approval from a supervising priest or official. And at the bottom, a big fat seal. Not your name, no one cares about that yet, but your master's. You're just the stylus behind the signature. The sun dips behind the ziggurat, casting long, soft shadows across the street. You sit by the doorway with your tablet, scribbling totals and trying not to smudge the fresh lines. A child walks by and stares at your work. "Is that a goat account?" he asks. You nod. "My uncle lost a goat once, said it ran off with a baker's daughter." You blink. "True story," he adds, running off before you can ask questions. Goats, it seems, are Mesopotamia's greatest mystery. You wrap up your clay and place it near the hearth to dry. Tomorrow, you'll bring it to your mentor for review. If your numbers add up, it might be your first official record entry. You might even get to press your own seal, though probably not yet. First, you have to not screw it up. A breeze kicks up outside. Somewhere, a flute plays. And inside your small, sun-dried room, you feel like a tiny cog in a massive goat-powered machine. But a vital one. Because without scribes, without records, without careful, crusty hands pressing truth into clay, this whole spinning society falls apart. The sun rises again and over the baked mud skyline, casting that pale amber light you've come to recognize as scroll o'clock. You stretch, your back still sore from yesterday's grain bin negotiations, and brush the sleep from your face with hands that smell faintly of clay and barley. Today, you're not in the bustling markets or echoing temple courtyards. You're inside a dim chamber that smells like old dust, burned oil, and wisdom. This is the city archive, a room where the past never dies. It just gets stacked very carefully. Clay tablets rest in neat rows on wooden shelves, sorted by dynasty, then ruler, then department. You're surrounded by silent columns of knowledge, everything from goat counts to military ration lists to letters complaining about poor beer quality. You pick one up at random and squint. 75 fish delivered half dead. This is unacceptable. Some ancient bureaucrat had a bad lunch. Your task is clear today. Learn how to file like a real Mesopotamian. Your mentor, a stooped man with an ink-stained robe and a permanent frown etched into his forehead, motions for you to start. He's the senior archivist, a living legend who once memorized 50 trade routes and still insists you can smell a forgery. Fake tablets, he mutters, smell too smooth. Your first lesson, categorization. You learn that tablets are sorted not only by topic, but by intended audience. A shipment report for the temple treasury goes in one section. The same kind of report, if addressed to a royal court, goes somewhere else entirely. It's like having multiple email inboxes, except each one is made of rock. You pick up a particularly large tablet labeled with a chipped triangle at the corner. That, your mentor says, is a type of early cataloging code. Triangle meant temple livestock. Square, legal proceedings. Circle, grain, or food rations. These were visual aids for non-scribes, traders, couriers, even soldiers who might need to grab the right document without reading the cuneiform. Mainstream fact for you. By the late 3rd millennium BCE, Mesopotamians had developed full-blown archival systems. They even had tablet rooms in palaces and temples, some with shelves, some with clay bins, designed to hold hundreds, even thousands of records. This wasn't just bookkeeping. It was the birth of bureaucracy. And with bureaucracy came protocol. As you sort, your mentor teaches you the sacred art of the clay envelope. Yes, a literal clay envelope. Let's say you finished writing a legal contract. Before handing it off, you wrap it in a thin slab of fresh clay, then press both parties' seals on the outside. This double layer prevents tampering. If someone tries to open it, the envelope cracks and you know the deal's been fiddled with. It's like a primitive tamper-evident seal, but with mud. You make your first one today. It's lumpy, slightly askew. Your seal impression looks like a drunken hedgehog danced across it. Your mentor doesn't laugh, but he doesn't praise it either. Progress. The real treat comes in the afternoon, when a visiting envoy from another city-state arrives. He's come bearing a complaint. Someone in Uruk failed to deliver the full consignment of 10 ingots promised 2 moons ago. He brings with him a messenger, 2 guards, and a stack of tablets sealed in bitumen. Now here's where it gets juicy. Fringe detail incoming. In some cases, scribes used not only clay, but a thin resin called bitumen to seal high-value or politically sensitive tablets. It hardened like black glass and could only be chipped away slowly. Breaking the seal without permission was akin to declaring war. You get to watch the envoy and your mentor compare seals. One from Uruk, one from his archive. Each seal is unique, carved into a cylinder worn like a bracelet. They roll it across fresh clay to verify identity. It's a signature, fingerprint, and ID badge all in one. But there's a problem. The seal on the trade receipt looks off. It's not the wrong name, it's the wrong animal. The official seal shows a lion hunt. This one shows a scorpion dance. An obvious forgery. or a very confused artist. Historians still argue whether such seal switching was deliberate fraud or honest mix-up. Some think rival families used similar motifs to confuse record keepers. Others argue the artist just got lazy. You silently decide never to draw a scorpion on anything again. Now the archivist must act as both librarian and judge. He consults old tablets, checks dates, examines clay type. Eventually, he determines the original shipment was intercepted, not by accident, but likely due to temple politics. Someone rerouted it as a divine tax, which is code for someone with a lot of muscle needed tin fast. You're scribbling all this into your own practice tablet, clumsily, hurriedly, but with growing excitement. You're not just learning accounting now, you're learning intelligence. Because that's what these records are, the soft power of information. Know who owes whom, who sent what when, and you're no longer just a scribe. You're the one with leverage. You walk out of the archive at dusk, your head buzzing with seals and systems. You pass two priests arguing about temple roof repairs and a child trying to sell royal blessed pebbles for 3 dates apiece. You stop by a tablet vendor and browse the latest writing styles. There's a new angled script gaining popularity. Faster to write, they say. Easier on the wrists? Maybe one day, scribes will all switch to it. Then again, maybe they'll just start using paper? Nah, not yet. You carry your own tablet home in both hands like a sacred loaf of bread. Your fingers ache, your eyes blur, but in your heart you feel it. You're starting to think like a Mesopotamian accountant, not just tallying things, tracking the story of a civilization, echo of one sandal slapping wet cobblestone. It's barely dawn, and some poor soul's already spilled a cartload of dates in the street, grumbling curses that melt into the morning haze. You shuffle out of your modest home, clay tablet underarm, yawning with the kind of jaw stretch that makes pigeons nervous. Today, you're going field side, not the romantic kind of field with wheat gently swaying in the breeze. This is a gritty, dust-choked parcel of leased land where farmers argue over irrigation rights and the goats look at you like they're considering unionizing. But this patch of Mesopotamia matters. It's where numbers meet nature, where all those tablets, lists, and scribbles try to keep up with mud, hoof, and human behavior. You're shadowing an overseer today. He's a wiry man with one eye, a spectacular mustache, and a clipboard-sized tablet strapped to his hip like a sidearm. He doesn't talk much, just gestures, a lot. You try not to get in the way or step in something ancestral. The job is clear, inventory verification. Remember those temple herds we counted last week? Now it's time to check if they still exist. Because if they don't, someone's head, probably yours, is going to roll like a pomegranate at harvest. You start by counting goats. Goats are chaos in wool form. They refuse to line up. They chew your robe. They glare at you like they know your weaknesses. But you manage. Sort of. You scratch tally marks into your clay with a stylus, trying to make each one look like you're completely sure. It's correct. Occasionally, the overseer leans in, squints, and grunts. That's the highest praise in this job. Mainstream fact alert. The Mesopotamians developed an entire system of field auditing. Officials physically visited estates, farms, and herds to ensure temple or palace records matched reality. Think ancient accountants in sandals, trudging through dust to prevent embezzlement. You're essentially one of them now. And guess what? People lie. At the third plot, the tenant farmer swears he delivered 10 sheep to the temple last month. You point out there are only 6 listed on the return tablet. He shrugs. Maybe some ran off? Or were divinely taken? He grins, hoping his reference to the gods will let him off. The overseer doesn't laugh. He writes something. You're pretty sure it's investigate further in shorthand. Fringe tidbit. Some scribes had private code marks they only used in field work. Little personal sigils or numbers indicating suspicion, fraud risk, or even bribes paid. One recovered tablet had a recurring symbol that scholars now think meant, "This guy's full of goat dung." The day drags on. You drink water that tastes faintly of copper. You eat a barley cake that could double as masonry. You step in something you sincerely hope was just mud. And all the while, you observe how data, the sacred numbers on your tablets, collide with real-world messiness. Rain ruins ink. Goats eat tags. One farmer swears he's never seen the calf listed under his name, while another claims he traded it last week for a basket of dried figs and a singing girl from Kish. Historians still argue whether these audits were mostly ceremonial or actually enforced. Some believe they were just ritual visits to appease the gods or nobles. Others insist they were brutal, high-stakes inspections with very real consequences. You're leaning toward the second theory, because at sunset, you watched the overseer confront a man who forged a field yield report. Said he harvested 20 measures of barley when the ground barely produced 5. The proof? His granaries are suspiciously empty. The overseer draws a symbol on a clay tag and ties it around the man's wrist with reed twine. You later learn it's a formal accusation marker, visible proof to anyone he meets that he's under investigation. Public shame as a data integrity tool. Efficient and petty. You ride back to the city on the back of a slow, bitter donkey who smells like wet pottery and has zero interest in your well-being. You reflect on the nature of truth, goats, and accountability. Back in the temple annex, you help log the day's audit findings. You press your stylus into a tablet that will dry overnight in the oven room, turning memory into permanence. You wonder what it must feel like to be a goat, just living your life, while people in robes count your every move like you're a walking spreadsheet. You smile. Then you sneeze because of all the goat hair still stuck in your sleeve. Later, over a bowl of lukewarm lentil stew, you share a joke with another apprentice scribe. How many scribes does it take to count a goat? He chews thoughtfully, then answers, "None." The goat just eats the tablet. You both laugh. It's probably the exhaustion talking. You head home beneath a moon so bright it glows like polished alabaster. You carry a clay note from the overseer, praise for your attention to detail. You want to bake it into your wall just to show off. Because today, you didn't just write numbers, you proved them. You connected the ink to the earth. And for one long, dusty day, you were the human bridge between data and once again, someone forgot to mention the sacred ducks. Yes, ducks, holy, honking, squawking messengers of the gods, apparently. Today, your temple assignment includes tallying livestock and waterfowl offered as divine tribute. And of course, no one's quite sure how many there were to begin with, or how many were sacrificed, or if any of them just wandered off to become wild again. You're starting to think half your job is inventing polite ways to say, "I think you're lying." The temple scribal office smells like warm clay and burnt fish. You settle in beside your now familiar wooden tablet desk, stylus in hand, hair frizzed from the humidity, posture hunched in the traditional exhausted bureaucrat shape. Today's goal? Reconciling incoming livestock reports with outgoing ceremonial use. That means matching up goats, oxen, and yes, ducks across several temple functions. Weddings, harvest rituals, divinations, and the occasional, "we messed up, let's bribe the gods," emergency offering. The trick is, everyone's numbers are different. Mainstream fact? Temples in Mesopotamia acted like banks, logistics hubs, and religious centers all at once. They received livestock from citizens as taxes or donations, used them in rituals, lent them to workers, and redistributed them to officials. Managing that flow required obsessive record-keeping. That was your job. So you pore over line after line. 5 sheep from the western field, marked as blemished. 3 ducks of unusual feather delivered during the eclipse. A single ox loaned to the royal butcher, marked pending return. Spoiler, you never see it again. You squint at an odd entry. A goat listed as refusing to die. That's unusual. A joke? A code? Some desperate scribe venting his frustration? You mark it with a triangle, a personal notation you're developing for weird but probably real. That's your fringe tidbit. Scribes sometimes developed internal shorthand or slang to make sense of absurd reports, like nail goat for one that kept escaping enclosures, or whistler duck for the one that disrupted a ceremony by mimicking the priest's tone. A few tablets even show little doodles, a frowning goat, a squiggle next to a traitor's name, perhaps meant to suggest dishonesty. Across the room, your senior scribe mutters something about divine overcounting. You raise an eyebrow. Turns out that's what they call it when different temple departments accidentally claim the same goat as part of their inventory. Yep, it's like ancient double dipping. One goat, two gods, three records. You try to sort it out, but it's like chasing fog through a thunderstorm. No one agrees on the numbers. Half the names are nicknames. One goat is apparently called Sassy Tail and was beloved by the priestesses, so she couldn't be sacrificed. Except she shows up in the burned offering logs 3 times. Historians still argue whether this confusion was due to genuine chaos, bureaucratic incompetence, or purposeful obfuscation to cover up theft or shortages. You're starting to vote for all of the above. At midday, you take a break. You wander to the back storeroom, where a junior priest is performing an impromptu inspection of the livestock holding pens. He lets you tag along. That's when you see it. One goat, sitting oddly dignified on a small mat, wearing what appears to be a beaded collar. You ask. He shrugs. VIP goat, belongs to the high priest's niece. Don't ask questions. You do not ask questions. Instead, you add a line to your own clay note. One decorative goat, not for use. That's the kind of record future historians will find and argue about for decades. Your fingers ache, your back protests. You long for a simple job, like herding actual cats. But this is the job, making sure the gods, the temple, the scribes, and the local merchants all agree on who owns what, who ate what, and whether that duck ever existed at all. And there's a deeper truth here. Beneath all the goats and ducks and snarky temple politics lies the heart of it all, accountability. You're not just a scribe. You're a keeper of trust, a documenter of social contracts wrapped in fur and feathers. Without your records, every offering, every ritual, every blessing could be faked or forgotten. You end your day reviewing a tablet from a year ago. It lists the same offerings you tallied today. Mostly the same. Slight changes, some shifts in names, quantities, types. Enough to raise an eyebrow. You realize the records evolve, like stories, changed not just by fact, but by memory, politics, superstition, and error. And somehow, that makes them more human. You stamp your latest tablet with your signature mark, a fishtail symbol you've grown fond of. Slide it into the archive oven for firing. Another permanent whisper in the chorus of clay that keeps this city running. You walk home under the stars, tired, dusty, but feeling oddly powerful. You, the goat accountant of Uruk, master of avian math, guardian of sacrificial truth. Maybe tomorrow someone will bring in a pig and really mess things up. But tonight, you rest. And in your dreams, shouting, the ducks never not war cries or anything. Too dramatic, just the unmistakable din of market bickering outside your window. A merchant swears someone sold him 12 goats and delivered only 10 and a half. You know it's going to be that kind of day. And right now, your sandals are missing. You pad barefoot through your clay brick house, squinting at the already sweltering sun outside. Your breakfast is a leftover fig cake and a half cup of barley beer, which tastes as lively as it sounds. You rub your eyes, throw on your scribe's sash, and brace yourself for the chaos of inventory reconciliation. Festival edition. Because today, is the festival of Ningirsu, god of war, agriculture, and apparently unnecessarily complex livestock accounting. What makes this different from yesterday's duck math scale? Everything gets multiplied during festivals. More goats, more oxen, more blessed geese that nobody really wants to touch because they bite. And crucially, more people trying to bend the rules, fudge the numbers, or sneak in an extra sacrifice for luck. Your job? Keep the count true. Not just for the temple, but for the gods. You think it's pressure now? Imagine misreporting a divine offering and having a storm god blame you for the next drought. One mainstream fact: ancient Mesopotamian festivals weren't just about religious joy or community gatherings, they were serious economic operations. Temples became logistical hubs, receiving waves of food, animals, beer, textiles, and other goods. Record-keeping had to scale accordingly, often requiring temporary staff, added scribes, and pop-up offices made from woven reed panels. So, you arrive at your post near the temple's eastern gate. Today, you're stationed right at the animal intake pen. It smells exactly how you'd expect. Your stylus is sharpened. Your attitude, less so. The first group arrives. 5 goats, 3 kids, and 1 something, with a floppy ear and a bad attitude. You note the entries on your tablet. 5 adult caprines, horns intact. 3 juveniles, unblemished. 1 anomalous specimen marked for observation. You nod to the herder. He grins, clearly relieved. He probably borrowed that last animal from a neighbor and prayed no one would notice. Spoiler, you noticed. Then come the bribes. A trader sidles up with a jug of sweet date wine. Maybe, he says with a sly grin, this helps you forget one of my goats has a limp. You raise an eyebrow. Sip the wine, it is good. Then you write, 1 adult goat, left hind leg impaired, assigned to lesser deity. Fringe tidbit. Scribes sometimes created unofficial categories to gently reclassify offerings without insulting the gods or their givers. Assigned to lesser deity was one such term, used when an offering was subpar but politically necessary. Everyone knew Inanna didn't really want that one-eyed sheep, but if it came from the king's cousin, you smiled and filed it appropriately. The day drags on. You develop a system. Good animals get marked with a triangle and a dot. Borderline ones? A wave mark. Total disasters? A stylus smash impression you make with the end of your tool. Your personal code for why gods why. A priestess approaches, elegant and confident, holding a tablet of her own. We've received 7 oxen for the second-day feast, she says. You nod. 6 arrived. 1 turned out to be a cow. She sighs. Again? Again. You mark it. 1 female bovine, reassigned to dairy reserves. And here's where the open debate begins. Historians still argue whether the mishandling of livestock during major festivals was due to honest mistakes, intentional fraud, or logistical overload. Some scholars suggest these festivals strained temple capacities so much that improvisation became institutionalized. Others think it was all a bit theatrical, rituals folded into the chaos, like some sacred performance of abundance and confusion. You tend to agree. It's not just record-keeping anymore. It's diplomacy, theology, drama. Later, a boy no older than 9 arrives leading a donkey with a goat tied on its back. This was for the moon god, he says, solemn as a vizier. You peer at him. Where's your family? He shrugs. They're late. I came first. You write his name, probably fake, next to 1 juvenile offering representative and wave him through. What are you going to do? Interrogate a child in front of a temple full of onlookers. By late afternoon, your tablet is full. You wedge it into your satchel and grab a fresh one. Your hands are clay-smeared, and your knees ache from squatting all day. A fellow scribe offers you a roasted locust. You accept, chew slowly, and stare into the middle distance like a soldier back from war. You catch a glimpse of the ceremonial plaza. Drummers pound rhythms that make your ribs buzz. Dancers swirl in gold-threaded linen. Children giggle, chasing sacred pigeons that were supposed to be symbolic, not part of the menu. The offerings continue into the evening. You record a final batch. 2 night goats, older, gray-furred, more stubborn than sin. 1 fire bull, massive and ornery, already nicknamed Smoky. 4 sheep dyed blue in honor of the city's guardian star. You can barely lift your stylus by the time the sun sinks behind the ziggurat. As you finish your last entry, a thought hits you. No one will ever know the exact truth of today. Not completely. Not the priests, not the gods, not even you, and you wrote half of it down. But thanks to you, the records exist. Clay will hold what memory forgets. You set your final tablet on the cooling rack. Blow on it. Say a silent prayer to Nabu, god of scribes and wisdom, and then finally, you head home. Too tired to care if the sacred with a reed stylus imprint on your cheek and dried clay under your fingernails. The festival is over, thank the gods, and the city has the collective hangover of 1,000 sacrificed goats and not nearly enough fresh water. But the work? Oh, it's just beginning. Because now comes what scribes dread most, Reconciliation Day. You shuffle into the temple archive like a zombie with sunburn, clutching the satchel full of yesterday's hastily etched clay tablets. The head scribe greets you with a nod that says, "If I have to redo your math again, I'm feeding you to the grain silo rats." You nod back, fully understanding that this is not an idle threat. You take your seat on the floor beside rows of bulging baskets, each one filled with cooling, grayish tablets tagged with twine and clay seals, like a giant's dusty filing cabinet. Here's the process. Match your festival records against the original temple ledger. Note discrepancies. Flag suspect entries. Summon the proper witnesses or offenders. Try not to cry. And definitely don't spill your barley beer on the master list again. You'll never hear the end of it. Mainstream historical fact time. Temple archives in ancient Mesopotamia were among the first organized bureaucracies in human history. They kept detailed inventories of everything from livestock to perfumes to who borrowed which shovel and forgot to bring it back. These records were centralized, categorized by type and date, and sometimes stored in fireproof chambers to withstand accidents or attacks. So as you sift through entries, you see the full economic symphony of the city. 7 sheep from the Weavers' Guild, cross-checked and confirmed. A trio of oxen donated by the brewery, double-counted naturally. 12 chickens that somehow became 10, and a bunch of feathers by dawn. That one's going to need a follow-up. Then you reach a strange one. 14 goats, 10 full, 4 fractional. You pause. Fractional goats? The tablet has a little triangle scratched next to it, your own mark, meaning double-check this guy. You bring it to the audit desk, where 2 other scribes are already fighting over whether a jar labeled honey was really just syrup of questionable bees. Fractional goats, you announce, holding up the tablet like it's a cursed artifact. One scribe groans. Not him again. That herder's been doing the partial goat scam since the last eclipse. Fringe detail alert. In fringe or rural settlements, some clever livestock keepers learned to game the system by borrowing animals or donating infirm, elderly, or mutilated ones and claiming they were half-value offerings. It created a paperwork headache and an ethical dilemma. You mark the record as pending verification, your version of saying, "I'm not touching this without a priest present." Then comes the real challenge, narrative discrepancies. See, numbers are one thing, but stories? They shift faster than riverbanks in flood season. Example, a butcher's donation of 5 sacrificial lambs. Your tablet says they were flawless, but another scribe's entry notes 3 blemished, 1 aggressive, one absconded. So,
You bring it to the
is it a
council
donation
chamber,
or a
where
zoo
temple
incident?
officials and scribes gather around massive tables covered in tablets like some ancient board game with very high stakes. Everyone has a different version of events. You all start talking over each other. A junior priest brings in incense to calm things down. It doesn't help. Historians still argue whether this part of the process, the group reconciliation of temple offerings, was more ritualistic theater than genuine accuracy check. Was it really about truth, or about negotiating a version of events everyone could live with? Some suggest it was deliberately ambiguous, allowing the temple to assert divine authority while smoothing over human error. You lean toward the latter, especially when you hear the head priest declare, "Let the record show that 4 lambs were accepted in spirit, though not in flesh." Translation: let's all pretend it was fine and move on. Hours pass. The room grows hot and sleepy. A clerk nods off into a basket of receipt tablets. Someone starts quietly humming a hymn to Ninlil, goddess of air and mercy. You do not feel particularly merciful. Still, you persist. Because here's the truth of it, your work matters. Not just to the priests or the tax collectors or even the gods. It matters because in this entire dusty, sun-baked civilization, you are the thin clay line between chaos and memory. Without you, how would anyone know which merchant cheated, which family gave generously, which festival had record-high barley beer losses? The details you preserve today might one day teach distant scribes what Mesopotamia truly valued. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'll read one of your scratchy little triangle symbols and laugh. The sun begins to set outside. Shadows stretch across the temple walls. You roll your stiff shoulders, set down your stylus, and exhale. You survived Reconciliation Day. Barely. As you leave the archive, you hear someone yell behind you. "Hey, did anyone log the missing donkey?" You don't turn around. The sky is turning the color of overripe figs, and the ziggurat casts a sleepy shadow over the city. You wind your way home, barefoot, stylus tucked behind your ear like some kind of ancient accountant's badge of honor. Your clay-streaked tunic smells like goat, dust, and questionable incense, but you earned that grime. You earned every crack in your fingernails, every sore joint from hours of sitting cross-legged on hard floors, every weird tablet that made you question whether goats even exist anymore, or if they're just bureaucratic hallucinations. You pass a group of kids playing Scribe and Merchant, a game where one yells, 10 shekels for the fish, and the other tries to etch a deal on a scrap of fired clay. One tiny kid dramatically shouts, "You'll hear from the temple about this," and you can't help but smirk. Future tax collectors of Mesopotamia. Bless their dusty little hearts. You finally reach your home, a small, cool brick nook on the edge of the artisan district. You collapse onto a woven mat that doesn't squeak, doesn't nag, and doesn't require a ledger entry. For once, there are no goats demanding to be counted. But your mind, ever restless, drifts back to that first scribe who ever poked a stick into mud and thought, this might just keep us all out of trouble. Maybe they weren't dreaming of a future civilization. Maybe they just really wanted to remember who owed them 2 goats, and yet from those humble scratches came empires. Mainstream historical fact time. It's widely accepted that the earliest writing systems, particularly cuneiform, evolved not from literature or epic poetry, but from basic accounting needs. Sumerian scribes were solving real-world problems, keeping track of taxes, temple offerings, property, and, you guessed it, goats. Not love letters, not wisdom scrolls, but head counts and food portions. That's humanity for you. But of course, the system grew, just like everything else in Sumer. Cities got bigger, kings got richer, bureaucracy got thicker than old barley porridge. And soon, the humble goat tablet became a blueprint for empires. Temples trained professional scribes. Schools called adubas drilled kids for years until they could draw perfect cuneiform wedges. Merchants relied on them. Priests demanded them. And kings? They built their power on them. And yet, hidden in the cracks of all this civilization was something stranger. A tablet discovered in a forgotten storeroom near Ur. Unlike the usual receipts or debt lists, this one was carved with odd symbols, early pictographs, mixed with what looked like jokes or metaphors. One line read, "Two goats walk into a temple," and then trailed off. Some scholars think it was a student's prank. Others argue it may be the earliest attempt at Mesopotamian stand-up comedy. Fringe detail alert. That's right. In the same archives where empires stored grain quotas, there were also doodles, riddles, and even what looked like board commentary. Another goat? Really? Scratched in the margins. Humanity never changes. Historians still argue whether these side scribbles were tolerated, encouraged as creative outlet, or harshly punished. Some temples preserved them, others erased them. But the fact they existed at all means something. It means even the most serious of ancient bookkeepers occasionally needed a laugh. So here you are, curled up on your mat, dusk pressing in, dreams swimming just out of reach, and you think about your day. You didn't slay a lion, you didn't invent the wheel, but you did your job. You kept the story straight, because that's what accounting really is. It's storytelling with numbers. It's the tale of a city told in goats, jars, sacks, and the occasional missing donkey. It's truth, massaged by tired scribes and grumpy priests. It's a clay record saying, "We were here, we counted, we mattered." And you? You're part of that legacy now? Not bad for someone who spent the afternoon arguing over half a sheep. Now close your eyes. Listen to the soft thrum of a distant lyre, the last chants echoing from the temple steps. Let your breath slow, your thoughts unspool like unwound flax. You've earned your rest, scribe. The goats can wait until morning. Wind down, 300 words, and now, as the last flickers of Mesopotamian lantern light fade into the quiet shadows of memory, let your breath settle like silt in a calm canal. You've wandered through sun-baked markets and temple halls, lined with silent tablets, touched history one clay slab at a time, and followed the path of a civilization built not just on conquest or architecture, but on the gentle insistence of keeping count, of goats, of grain, of days gone by. Soften your eyes. Unfurrow that brow. The stylus is down, the ledgers are closed, and the only record that matters now is the rhythm of your own heartbeat, steady as the Tigris. The world, vast and echoing with ancient voices, continues turning. A scribe like you scratched the last mark of the day, pressed a seal into warm clay, and smiled at a job, well, maybe not perfectly done, and that's enough. Now, sink deeper into your blanket. Let the sandstorms of the past dissolve into dreams. Let each breath carry you further, from columns and sums, and closer to stillness, to peace. We'll visit more mysteries soon, but tonight, we rest. Good night, scribe.